Scripture to consider before the news. I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land. Know this, the nation of Israel will be parted. As it is written. Now unto the news. Guterres calls for UN and Quartet-led Israeli-Palestinian peace process. United Nations Secretary-General António Guterres threw his support behind the call for an international peace conference under the auspices of his organization and the Quartet, which would resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict based on the pre-1967 lines. The long-agreed goal is clear: to end the occupation and realize a two-state solution on the basis of the pre-1967 borders, in line with international law, relevant United Nations resolutions, and bilateral agreements, with Jerusalem as the capital of both states, Guterres said in New York. He spoke at the start of the opening 2021 session of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. The United Nations remains committed to supporting Palestinians and Israelis to resolve the conflict and bring an end to the suffering, Guterres said. The Israeli-Palestinian peace process has been frozen since 2014. Former US President Donald Trump's peace plan never led to the resumption of direct Israeli-Palestinian talks, and US President Joe Biden is not expected to launch a peace process. The Palestinian Authority wants to replace a US-led peace process model with a multilateral one, and PA President Mahmoud Abbas has called for an international peace conference. Guterres said that Abbas's call for an international peace conference under the auspices of the United Nations, and an expanded Middle East Quartet, with considered preparation and involvement by the key parties, provide a positive opportunity to advance peace in the region. The quartet was largely dormant with regard to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict during the Trump years, because consensus of all four of its members is needed: the United States, the UN, the European Union and Russia. In an interview with The Washington Post this week, Guterres said that a quartet meeting could be held within weeks. At the UN on Thursday, Guterres called for Israelis and Palestinians to refrain from unilateral acts that can jeopardize the possibility of restarting the peace process. In specific, he asked Israel to immediately halt all settlement activity, which is a major obstacle to the achievement of the two-state solution, and a just, lasting and comprehensive peace. He also spoke out against violence and Israeli restrictions on Palestinian movement. Persistent acts of violence in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, as well as Israeli movement and access restrictions and other violations of international humanitarian and human rights law, exacerbate mistrust between Israelis and Palestinians and drive us further from peace, Guterres said. Separately, he also urged Israel to help the Palestinians acquire COVID-19 vaccines. The special coordinator continues to encourage Israel to help address the priority needs of Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory, and to support COVID-19 vaccine availability more generally, which is in line with Israel's obligations under international law, Guterres said. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell so you can get notified whenever new Bible prophecy news videos are uploaded. Scripture to consider: and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. That he is the Prince of the Covenant, which is still looking to be Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. In the prime cipher using gematria, his name also equals the number of the beast, 666. In other news concerning the Prince of the Covenant, that will confirm a covenant with many to move the world into the final prophetic 70th week for Israel. Macron: Israel, Saudis must be involved in new talks on Iran nuclear deal. French President Emmanuel Macron offered Thursday night to be an honest broker in talks between the United States and Iran in order to revive the 2015 nuclear accord. I will do whatever I can to support any initiative from the US side to re-engage in a demanding dialogue, and I will try to be an honest broker and a committed broker in this dialogue, Macron told the Atlantic Council think tank. Former US President Donald Trump took the US out of the accord in 2018 and hit Iran with numerous sanctions, and it has since largely collapsed, with Tehran returning to enriching uranium to degrees and amounts beyond the caps set by the deal. The French leader tried repeatedly and unsuccessfully to persuade Trump to respect the 2015 pact. Macron argued in favor of new negotiations with Iran that would also place limits on the Islamic Republic's ballistic missile program, and which would include Israel and Saudi Arabia. The latter countries were fiercely opposed to the 2015 deal and supported Trump's decision to pull the United States out. Iran has said repeatedly it will not agree to any new negotiations. We have to find a way to involve in these discussions Saudi Arabia and Israel because they are some of the key partners of the region directly interested by the outcomes with our other friends of the region, Macron said. It was unclear whether Macron's offer to be a broker would be welcomed in Washington. The U.S. National Security Council will hold an urgent meeting Friday on Iran's nuclear program, according to an Axios report, as the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden considers how to engage with Tehran in an effort to return to the deal. Axios said a central issue under debate will be whether to move quickly to return to the accord, or to wait until after the Iranian presidential election in June. Meanwhile, Biden's national security advisor Jake Sullivan said Thursday the U.S. is actively engaged in consultations with its European allies, particularly Germany, the UK, and France, to produce a unified front when it comes to our strategy towards Iran and towards dealing with diplomacy around the nuclear file. According to Reuters, the foreign ministers of the US, UK, France and Germany are expected to discuss the Iran deal in the coming days. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif suggested in an interview this week that the European Union could help synchronize actions by both sides in order to build trust and revive the deal. Iran insists that the US drop new sanctions imposed by Trump before it returns to the deal, but the new Biden administration has said Tehran should respect the terms of the 2015 deal before it will act. Zarif's suggestion to involve the EU received a cool reception in Washington, where a State Department spokesman reiterated U.S. demands on Tuesday. On Tuesday, U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price said Washington and Tehran were a long way from a return to the deal. Price said U.S. President Joe Biden has been very clear that, if Iran comes back into full compliance with its obligations under the deal, the United States would do the same, and we would then use that as a platform to build a longer and a stronger agreement that also addresses other areas of concern. Of course, though, we are a long way from that. Price said the first steps for Washington were consulting with our allies, consulting with our partners, consulting with Congress before we're reaching the point where we're going to engage directly with the Iranians and willing to entertain any sort of proposal. He added, "We haven't had any discussions with the Iranians, and I wouldn't expect we would until those initial steps go forward." Last month, Tehran announced it was beginning to enrich uranium up to 20%. Far beyond the 3.5% permitted under the nuclear deal, and a relatively small technical step away from the 90% needed for a nuclear weapon. Iran also said it was beginning research into uranium metal, a material that technically has civilian uses but is seen as another likely step toward a nuclear bomb. The United Nations Nuclear Agency said Iran has continued to ramp up its nuclear program in recent weeks by further enriching uranium and installing new centrifuges at its underground Natanz plant, according to a Tuesday report. Iran insists it is not seeking to develop nuclear weapons. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Sunday that Iran was currently months away from being able to produce enough material to build a nuclear weapon. And, he said, that timeframe could be reduced to a matter of weeks if Tehran further violates restrictions it agreed to under the 2015 nuclear deal with world powers. Biden administration officials have indicated that Israel will be involved in its decision-making process regarding Iran's nuclear program. Lastly, ICC has jurisdiction to probe Israel, Hamas for war crimes, pretrial judges rule. In 2-1 decision, judges determined Palestine as a state, and The Hague can thus investigate there. Probe likely to cover 2014 Gaza war, settlement policy, IDF actions on Gaza border. In a major decision released Friday, a pretrial chamber of the International Criminal Court determined that The Hague has jurisdiction to open a criminal investigation against Israel and the Palestinians for war crimes alleged to have taken place in the West Bank, Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem. ICC Chief Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda indicated in 2019 that a criminal investigation, if approved, would focus on the 2014 Israel-Hamas conflict, Operation Protective Edge, on Israeli settlement policy and on the Israeli response to protests at the Gaza border. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned Friday's ruling. Today the ICC proved once again that it is a political body and not a judicial institution, he said. The ICC ignores the real war crimes and instead pursues the State of Israel, a state with a strong democratic government that sanctifies the rule of law, and is not a member of the ICC. The US concerned about ICC ruling on Israel. The US on Friday expressed concern over the International Criminal Court's (ICC) ruling that it has jurisdiction over Judea, Samaria, Gaza and Eastern Jerusalem, paving the way for a war crimes probe against Israel. "We are reviewing the ICC decision on Palestine and we have concerns about the ICC taking steps against Israeli personnel," said State Department spokesman Ned Price. "We share the goals of the ICC, but we always believed its jurisdiction should only apply for countries who agree for it or as a result of a UN Security Council decision," he added. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. And stay tuned to Watchman Report for more Bible prophecy news. To learn how to receive forgiveness of sins and get your name in the Book of Life, visit beingjustified.com today. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Tomorrow is not promised. Make sure your eternal soul is being justified.